All right, so welcome everybody. This is Chris with Chris Courses. Today I wanted to show you what exactly my process is for dealing with clients who want new features added to their website. What do I actually do from the very beginning of talking to that client, trying to understand what it is that they want on their site, all the way to designing that feature and then actually developing it and then uploading it to a server in which the client can actually view what it is we just designed and developed. All right, so let me make sure this is running. Looks like we're good to go in the background. So great. So this client that we're working with has been our client for about the past 2 years. Their name is Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay, and they're the same client that we did the last stream on. And essentially, they are like a Habitat for Humanity, but they're a little different. Their main thing is that they go to homes and community centers in dire need of renovations, and they basically gift these community centers all the renovations they need to create a healthy community. Same thing with families. Any families who need some sort of renovation to their home to help support their family. RTTB, Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay, is essentially in charge for helping these families out and giving them something that's a little more livable compared to what they had right now because they currently can't afford it. So that is the client we are working with, and we took this site over from another company at the time, and they asked us, Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay asked us to basically add a few new features to their site, including this donate page, in which a user can just land on this and donate directly from Rebuilding Together Tampa website. So this is what we have so far. All this is fully functional, such as the donations, functionality, adding first name, last name, entering a credit card. All this is actually connected directly to Stripe. So we have some sort of payment processing in check. And same thing with down here. This is what we did on the last stream. This was developed by a beginner developer. Her name is Khadija, and she did a really good job on this, but there are a few things that we could fix up. So we kind of pinpointed what it is that we could do better compared to last time. So Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay has asked for a few new features added onto the site, and those features I listed out over here. So they requested that we add a pop-up for how to donate via check. So some sort of pop-up modal over here that when you click this button, more information appears on how a user who visits the site can donate through check. They also wanted to add some donate in honor of someone functionality. So basically, how do I actually dedicate this donation right here in this form to a specific someone? How do I send them a nice email and maybe that person will actually donate in return because they got that nice email? And then they wanted a new footer because their current one, it's really hard to read the text. And there are a lot of design decisions here that we can just do a little better compared to before. So for this stream, we're going to go on towards 10 p.m. So we have about 50 more minutes. And some of this stuff can really take some time. So I'm assuming we'll definitely get through this first one. But these other two, such as donating in honor of someone and Twitter, we may not get to today, but we'll definitely do another live cover. So, but this will all be really helpful for you guys. This is what I do for every website client that I actually develop professionally for. I design a lot of the stuff I develop as well, so you don't have to feel restricted. If you're just a developer and not a designer, I'm going to tell you exactly what I do as a developer to design these sections. So let's get started with adding a pop-up that explains how a user can donate via check. So when a user clicks right here on Learn More, we want more text, some sort of pop-up that explains all the instructions required for a user to actually donate check. Now, if we click on this right now, we just go to some random link, and that is not the correct functionality. So we actually need to design and then develop that functionality in order to get it working. Now, before we develop anything, I always go straight into design. I really never ever develop anything before designing it, just because it can end up being a waste of time, and things usually don't look good if you just go straight to development. If you're in an app or program like Adobe XD, it's just really easy to make really good looking designs and artboards, and it's really much quicker than if I were to try to develop something from scratch, because I can really just fine tune everything right here, use this as a reference before developing it. So really helpful way to kind of see and envision what it is you want to develop before actually doing it and potentially wasting time by developing something that looks bad, scratching it, whatever. So I always go into design first before developing it. So that's what we're going to do for this feature on adding a pop-up. And we can kind of look at a little bit of the current design that we have right here. So this was the original design. This was actually supposed to be a modal, like this section with the image and the actual donate field was supposed to be a modal. So if I look at this full screen, this right here was supposed to pop up on every page, but we had a little bit of requirement change in which they wanted to put this on its own individual page so that we can actually send links out to people and they can visit this donate page if necessary for marketing purposes. So we actually put this feature on its own page, and it's a little different from the design, but really we could just copy and paste this middle section onto its own page. So we didn't need to design this whole thing with this light green background. But since we're actually adding more stuff onto this, including this down here, well, we'll want to have some sort of design associated with this modal that we're going to be creating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make this really quickly look like we have over here with this green background. So we can kind of use that as a placeholder, a reference for creating that modal on top of this section, basically the whole page, because it's going to take up the whole thing. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we know this isn't actually a modal. There's no drop shadow on this or anything like that on the actual site. So all I'm doing here is I'm taking off the drop shadows. Actually, there might be a drop shadow. Okay, there's a drop shadow, but it is not purple, obviously. So what I'm going to do is just mimic things as closely as possible to what we saw on that website so we can have an accurate representation of developing that actual modal on top of everything. We have that little bit of a drop shadow, and what I can even do is I can screenshot this this actual web page, paste it into my XD document, and then just use that as a reference directly. And honestly, if we wanted to be very quick with this, we didn't really want to mess with the individual elements. Something we could easily do, rather than having to put like drop shadows on everything and changing the backgrounds correctly like this, is we could honestly just get rid of all this for now and just start with a blank artboard. Here, white. And we can take a screenshot of the actual website and just paste it in here. Make it full size of the artboard, like so. And then just lock it. And this is just going to act as our reference for designing that. Modal is on top of everything, but it's just nice to really see what things would look like with this kind of stuff in the background. So let's go through the process. We click learn more. What happens? The modal appears on top of everything as it is right now. I'm going to screenshot everything that we see right here, paste it into the XD document as I just described. And then we can lengthen the XD document a bit just so everything is included in there. And now within XD, we actually have the background for what it is we want to design on top of. So really quickly, I'm going to go ahead into the chat just to make sure I answer any questions that you guys have along the way. And let's see what we got over here. So Manuel Fernandez, does XD allow for code to be spruced up? So XD, I'm going to show you this. It's really cool. They have an option in which you can actually export all of your artboards into a unique URL in which any developer can visit. And all it does is it displays the artboard in the actual browser. And when it displays actual artboard in the browser, you can actually select each individual element and get the exact CSS for the element as it was within XD. So it's a really cool feature. You can see the CSS, anything associated with it that you need, such as the actual text, the size of the text, the font family, whatever it is. XD is honestly such a good program for designers, developers, I definitely highly recommend. So it does allow for code to be spruced up in some sort of manner, because it offers actual CSS and code for you right off the bat. Sometimes you just need to kind of edit it as needed to get the end result that you're looking for. So thank you for the question, Manuel Fernandez. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask along the way. Now's your chance to get as much knowledge from me as possible before I head out. So back to it. We're designing that modal on top of this donation. So we have the image in the background, and this is just our placeholder. And really when it comes to designing a modal, you want to have some sort of dark, transparent overlay on top of it. And this serves a very specific purpose. This little dark background makes sure that your eyes are drawn to whatever focus you want, whatever element is overlaid on top of this. So really what we're doing with this dark overlay is we're de-emphasizing everything in the background because we don't want the user's main focus to be that. We want the main user's focus to be whatever is on top of this modal instead. So that's the use of that gray background. You'll see it on a lot of websites. It also provides us an indicator of how do I actually exit out of this background as well. Usually click some sort of exit button, or you can actually click on the gray background and it just exits out of everything directly. So that's the purpose of adding some sort of modal background like this. If we were to get rid of this modal background and just display the modal directly, it just looks messy. Our direction isn't direct. Our eyes aren't really directed towards one specific element. It's just all the stuff on one page. So that's why we include the black background. Once I add the black background, I want to make sure I lock it with Command L. And what that does is it just makes sure that when I start selecting things, such as click and dragging, that I really can't select that gray background. I just want to move this all over the place. So I'm going to center this white box, which is going to act as our modal. And you'll see right here, this Learn More button, we have curved buttons. Curved buttons are usually more welcoming than just straight edges that you see on squares. So I want to make sure our modal abides by the same kind of rounded corner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to round the corners a bit, just slightly. And we start to have a more friendly looking modal compared to just straight edges that we saw before. Funny, just rounding the corners on something can definitely make something look a little more. And if you're working with a professional client who's like very or just needs that little bit of credibility kind of push, usually I would just keep the edges straight. But if you want someone, you're working with a client who like a little more friendly and wants people to come in, wants to welcome people inwards, then I would usually curve the edges. And little things like this definitely do make the difference with the end result of a design. So we're already looking pretty good here with the modal, but really we have, if we look at our to-do list, we need some sort of explanation text in which a user can give by check. And basically within this explanation text, this is a place in which the team can input address, instructions, whatever. So let's just start with the explanation text. I'm going to create a text box right here. And I'm honestly not sure what the actual explanation text for the RTT is going to be. So really the best thing to do here is just add some lorem ipsum. To grab some lorem ipsum, we're just going to look up a good generator online. I'm sure there's some sort of XD plugin that does this for you. I just haven't found it yet. But really, when you just look it up online, grab it you need, go back to your text box or one, paste that lorem ipsum text in there. All right, so we have some text in here, but things aren't looking the greatest. There are a few things we can do to make this text look even better than it is. The number one issue I see right off the bat is this text is 12-point font. Now, if you're typing like a Word document or something, this is pretty standard, but on the web, the standard is actually 16 size font. This is just font that's really easy to read. I pretty much recommend like any of your body fonts are always 16 size, just because it serves as a good baseline for people to prevent people from needing to strain their eyes on smaller text, and it's not too big to the point where it just gets annoying to read. We're going to make things 16 size font. There's a little more we can do here to make this look even better. Typically with paragraph text, I like making it a little bit of a shade of gray rather than just pure black. I kind of find like the pure black is just too hard on the eyes for contrast purposes. So what I do is I just kind of add a little bit of gray to this to make it easier on the eyes, a lot more enjoyable to read than it would be. It also is kind of tight together on the line height. So another thing that you can do to make this look a little better is to change the line height to something that is 1.4 times the size of your actual font. I believe at this that is 20. I might be totally wrong on that. And sometimes you even want to go a little more, such as 1.5 times the size of the font. And really it just takes a little bit of tuning. So the reason this is looking a little is I'm actually affecting letter spacing rather than the line height. So let's make sure we're actually affecting the line height. Line height right now is 19. Let's see what it is at 20. That is a little better. It's just a little more clear, easier to read. even 22. I think I'm just going to stick with 20, kind of the standard sizing line height for paragraph text when it is 16 font. We're going to stick with this, and now we have better looking instructions. And there might be a little more instructions in this. I'm not completely sure, but we will see. So I'm just going to add in one more paragraph of lorem ipsum text beneath this. And both of these probably won't be the same size paragraphs, so what I'm going to do is delete some of the paragraph. And now we have some good instruction text. But one of the issues is if I were to come to this page, like let's just say I left this page open and I came back to it, I wouldn't know right off the bat what I'm looking at here unless I really started reading things with a paragraph. I just want some easy headline I can look at to really indicate what it is I'm looking at. So this is just a nice introduction to what we're looking at in case we need to come back to this. It's just something that we can help the user, something we can use to help the user indicate what it is they're looking at right off the bat. So the headline for this is going to be exactly what we see over here. It's going to be the give by check. For headlines, we want this to be the thing that stands out. So it's pretty typical that we bold this. And we don't want to make this too big. A lot of one of the biggest mistakes I see beginners make on design is that they like making their headline text super big, like way bigger than it needs to be. But a lot of the time, it just needs to be a little bigger, obviously bolder, so that it stands out a little more. But it doesn't need to be gigantic like I see a lot of designers, developers do. So this, I mean, honestly, it doesn't look terrible, but it just doesn't look as professional as it could be by doing something simple with just a little bit bigger text. 28 font, 8, then compared to having. So one more thing we can do here to make sure that this stands out a little more and that we have this differentiation of concerns between the headline and the paragraph text is change the color of this, make this a little darker. Typically, I like my headlines dark. You can even mix it up with some color sometimes if you really want to make this stand out. And playing with some colors that you have in your palettes are definitely something you can do just to test things and see how things look. And I kind of like this dark green. It gives a nice contrast for the headline and also gives a nice little color pop compared to what we would have if we were to just use a plain dark gray font color instead. I'm going to go with that dark green just because it looks better. And then we need some sort of way to close out of this modal. So when giving by check, we're not actually going to include some sort of like online process by check. This is really like sending in a check to a certain address. So we don't really have any other process besides this instruction right here. So really the only other thing we need to do is give the user a way to close out of this modal. I'm going to group all these together, and to close out of a modal, we just need a simple close button. So I believe within this document, prior to this live stream, I've created a button which we can basically reuse across the site. So what I did just there is I copied the button, and I'm just going to paste it onto here. And what we want to say on this button is instead of view case study, it's just close. That's way too much padding for the text that's inside of it. I'm just going to make the button a little smaller. Make sure this is centered inside of it. Like so. And just to make the button a little smaller, typically buttons are a little wider even if the text inside of it is smaller, but this is probably like a good ratio for the actual button. So a few things here. Typically a button with a background color like this is like the primary action. This is just a close button. There's like not much other primary action to be like taken, such as going to an actual donation process by check. Something you can do and play around with is actually making this button a gray background instead of that green. And typically you just want to play around with like the actual colors on this gray a bit. But this de-emphasized gray is kind of a good indicator that that no like real specific programmatical action is supposed to take place after hitting this button. So really close is more of like a cancel. And when I use some sort of like cancellation or close kind of button rather than like some sort of primary action button, I like making it gray just because it really de-emphasizes things compared to trying to communicate to a user that we want them to perform some sort of action instead. So that's why I'm going to use the gray here. And it also makes sure that our headline pops out a little more compared to competing with that green background instead. So really, that's all we need to do for this design portion. We can even go into designing this for mobile, which is something you definitely want to take into consideration. But if we're just looking at this, we can pretty much just think in our head exactly how this would work mobily. Is we're just going to shrink everything together, including the text, so that it just stacks on. And it should work if we develop things. So I don't really need to do a mobile design for this. I probably wouldn't if I were on my own, just because I know exactly what's going to happen. But it's something to take in consideration. If you're designing a section that is a little more complex, you might want to provide a mobile design for yourself or another developer who might be working on this, because otherwise they might not know exactly what the hell they're doing on that mobile design. This is good to go for our design, and that's kind of this process I would take to getting this up and running, is just asking a lot of questions, not only to the client, but myself, and the actual website and design that's already there in regards to what do I want the user to achieve, and how am I going to let them and permit them to achieve that action. So how do I want the user to know how to give by check? Well, I want to give them some sort of instruction process that might be kind of long, too long to fit right here. So why not include some sort of modal in which I can contain all that text into one? How do I get the user out of the modal? Well, I added this close button right here, pretty self-explanatory. Just asking questions like that and then putting them into design, and then knowing those small design tweaks that make certain things stand out, certain things not stand out as much, are really all you need to start making good designs. So that's going to be how basically we design a section based off the client's needs. Now, the next thing is, if you want to give this to a developer and you're just a designer, or you just want to inspect like the actual CSS for what it is we just designed, XD provides for a very cool way to actually get this to those developers or yourself and get that CSS. So what I'm doing here is I'm switching from design mode to prototype mode, and I'm selecting this little home icon. And what this does is when I go to this share tab after clicking that home button, this just specifies I only want to share and create a link for this one design that I just created. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want a new link for this one design, and I'm actually going to change the title of this artboard before I do that. This is going to be the give by check modal. Go back to share over here, and like I said, we want to make sure that we have a new link ready to go. And the view setting for this, I'm going to set to development. This means that we can share our design with developers, and this is what we're going to use, actually grab CSS from the design as needed. And this is what you can use as a link to send to developers. So let's just see what this looks like. I'm going to say this view setting for this is development. We're only going to include this one, or we should only include this one artboard. It looks like we're including everything right now. And I think the reasoning for that is because we haven't actually really prototyped per se our development experience. And what prototyped means is like actually drawing out the user flow from one page to another, interaction to interaction, based on what users click. So if I were to say like, hey, if I'm a user and I click close right here, what actually happens next? Like what artboard do I actually go to? Well, I'd probably drag this to an artboard that just has this on the background, but for just time's sake purposes, I just want to make sure that I'm only exporting this artboard, and I can deal with exporting just this one as well. I don't really want to export everything because it's a lot at once. So I'm just going to drag this interaction button over to our original artboard, even if we just want to focus on this one. And you can see only these two are selected. So these are the only ones that are going to be exported when we hit create link over here. You can pretty much access restrict this as well. So if your client is basically a client who wants some privacy on their designs, basically you can require a password. Just make sure we're back. Okay. I believe we are back. Sorry, sometimes streaming I can't even speak. The streaming software just crashes randomly. Unfortunately, that's what's happened. But where were we? Okay, so we just generated our link. We're going to hit create link. And what this is going to do is basically make sure that the page we just designed is available for developers. And I didn't include any restriction settings. If you guys want to visit this link, you're more than welcome to see exactly where it is and what I'm doing based off of the link I'm developing with. So I can even post this in the chat for you guys. You guys can visit that and kind of get an idea for what I'm looking at directly on your own computers. So what we're going to do is visit that link. And once we visit that link, we can hit this little HTML closing bracket icon. And once we hit it, we're going to be introduced to the developer mode of the design. And what's really useful is it includes any assets. If you include any images that you can download, it includes all the colors that I just used on the design, such as the dark green, which is right here, any grays that are associated with the text as well. And it includes all the font sizes that I used too. So if I actually click on a piece of the content, it gives me the content directly, which I can just copy and paste into our actual code. And it gives me all the CSS associated with this one section. Now, I wouldn't recommend just copy and pasting the CSS directly because you want to make sure this is responsive. Set width of like 500 typically isn't how you would develop this, but it's still useful to know and see exactly what the exact CSS is. So now that we have this actual design and we have this open in the XD link, let's go ahead and actually develop this. So to develop this, I'm going to open up my text editor and I'm going to go to the page that this is on, which is, I believe, just donate, and it is. So we have this donate page and we want to make sure essentially that we're just replicating exactly what we saw within that. So let go, here it is. I'm going to drag it over here so we have these side by side. And the first thing we need to do is add this grayish background when you click on learn more. So how do we actually do that? Well, let's go ahead and look at learn more within our website. And what we're going to do is inspect that button. And then we're going to find it in our code. To find it in our code, you can select the class on the website, go into your page, and search for that class. Okay, so it's right in front of us right here. And all this code right now is set up with Vue.js. And I really recommend always using Vue.js across your site because it just makes development so much easier than it would be with just using pure JavaScript. So what I mean by that is with using Vue, if I want to add an event listener on this learn more button, I can say @click equal to, and what happens when I click on this? Well, I'm going to call a JavaScript function available within my main Vue file here. So what function do we actually want to call when clicking this? I'm going to say open give by check modal like so. We're going to save that. And then since we know when we click this, we want to call this function. Well, the function doesn't actually exist. To actually add this function, we want to go to our methods object within our main Vue.js instance. Then we're going to add that function within this methods object. What happens when you actually click this now? Well, for now, just to test things, we're going to add a console log statement that just has the text test. And we know that even though this is currently set as an anchor tag, but since we just want this to open a modal, what we can do is we can change this from an anchor tag to a button tag instead. And we'll maintain all of our classes, or at least we should, because we have our class object, our class attribute on top of this. But it's a little more semantic just to say this is a button, not an anchor tag, because it doesn't actually go anywhere else. So if I save this and refresh the page over here, we might not see anything just yet. Go ahead and test. Okay, so when we click learn more, we're definitely not going to another page now. So we fixed that one issue, but let's go ahead and head to our console statement. We're just going to hit learn more a couple times and you'll see our actual code is not being compiled. So we have to do a little bit of debugging to make sure that this is something that actually outputs that console log text. So let's look in our console and see what it exactly is that we can that we need to fix. So this is saying property or method open give by check modal is not defined on the instance, but reference. And really what that means is it is just looking within our actual methods object, but it can't find this open give by check modal. So the first thing I would do is I would just make sure that this method matches this method right here by pasting it in, which it does. And then I'm going to look inside our terminal and see what's going on here. So I think really the main issue is we have this code donate PHP that's basically being compiled through Vue, and since we're adding things into our main Vue file, such as open give by check, we need to make sure that we're recompiling everything in index.js into a readable file, a readable bundle file. So the reason this isn't working is because we're not actually running our build process in the background. To run our build process, I run yarn dev. This dev command is just something I specified within package.json. So when I run yarn dev, I'm really just calling webpack config, webpack dev.js. It's a little shorter. But we're running webpack in the background to make sure that we're compiling everything within index.js into a bundled up file that's a lot more optimal and optimized than it would be if we weren't to use webpack. So now that we have actually bundled this up with webpack, we're going to go back to the donate page. And let's try this again. Now when we hit learn more, you'll see now that everything's being compiled, we're actually logging our test text, which is within right here. So we have the ability to start calling JavaScript based on when we hit the button. But we actually need the HTML to show but maybe we should just make this HTML text show before we even hit this button so we can know exactly what it looks like. So to do that, we can really just go into our PHP file up here, start developing that design that we had, our actual file right here. So let's do that. Let's look at this right now. Obviously, we have that background text, or excuse me, that gray background that has that transparency to it. We're just going to create a div for that. And we are going to add a class. And this is something that should overlay basically on top of everything on the page. But overlay everything on top of the page, we're going to add our Tailwind fix class. And all these classes are created from the library Tailwind CSS. If you want to check it out, just go head on over to Tailwind CSS. Make sure we're not Pinterest or anything like that. We're going to go over to Tailwind CSS. And you can visit this documentation and basically see all the classes, see what Tailwind CSS is, but basically it's a utility framework in which each of these classes only references one style. And I really like developing this way instead of the classic CSS way because it makes my files way easier to edit. And I think you would agree if you were to use it as well. That's just like a quick intro to Tailwind CSS. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but you're going to see it in action right now. Like I said, I know I want this gray background to be overlaid on top of everything and follow you no matter where you are if you're scrolling on the page. So I'm going to make sure that it's fixed. And to give it basically that full screen look, we want to make sure that it's on the left, top, right, and bottom portions of the screen. And Tailwind has a class for that called inset0. And all that does is sets the top, right, bottom, and left elements, styles, to always be 0. And when you do that, go ahead and add a background blue of anything, 400. So when you set something to inset0 background blue, we should start seeing everything overlaid on top of each other. And if you don't right off the bat, I mean, you just have to go ahead and debug this like any other developer. And we're going to do that as well. So if we inspect what we just created, you'll see the styles are all here. Like I said, we have a top, right, bottom, and left equal to 0. We have our background blue, but it looks like we're missing our fixed class. And that is actually because this shouldn't be prefixed. This should just be fixed like so. And now we have that overlay, but it's only covering some of the sections. That just, if other things are overlaying on top of it, that just means that they have a different z-index. And the z-index is the thing that determines what's overlaid on top of each other on the browser. It just means that these elements have a higher z-index than our actual background. So Tailwind provides some z-index classes. We're going to say our z index for this blue background is going to be 50. Now it covers everything. Great, that's what we want. But our background isn't blue. If we look over here, our background's actually this grayish with transparent background. So instead of background blue, I'm going to say this is going to be not equal to a Tailwind class. We're going to make this a custom CSS. It's going to be background black, transparent. This is just going to have a black background with an opacity associated with it. So it looks like I already created this class, which is pretty helpful. You'll see the background color is just set to RGBA000 with an alpha channel of 0.7, which means that we can see stuff behind it, but we can also make sure that our focus is directed to that modal on top. So we've already achieved this black background. Now we really just need to overlay that modal inside of this. So to create a modal, we're just going to create a div, going to have a class, and we know the background of this is white. So what does that mean? We're going to add a class, bg white, background white, self-explanatory. We'll start getting some content in based off of what we have in our design. So to easily grab content from our design, we're going to hit the development button, click on the content we want to grab. Then we can just click on the text right here under this content tab. It's going to copy it to your clipboard. So we know this text is a headline. We can just say that this is going to be an H1. It can be anything from H2 to H3 based on the sizing set by default and styling. Let's just do H2. We can always resize this. We'll just say that's an H2, and then we know this is a body paragraph. This is all paragraph text. We have one paragraph here, one paragraph here. So we're going to copy this content, paste it in. And there are two paragraphs here. We want to make sure that we separate them into their own individual paragraph tags for semantic purposes. We're going to paste that in as two separate paragraphs. And then we have a close button, which we should be able to use a button class that was created in. So if we look at our current code, we're going to find class tw-button. And this is actually that learn more button that we see right here under the by check headline. We want to make sure we reuse that for just consistency purposes, because otherwise we'd be writing out every single style that actually is included in this class, and it would just be. So instead, we're just going to create this button element, and this is going to have a class of tw-button. And let's just keep copying what we have over here in our button class to make sure that it interacts and functions exactly the same as we have specified within the actual buttons that are on the screen. So we pasted all of our content into this background modal, which is just a div with background white. Now if we look at donate, we have the beginning of our background modal. Okay, so FYN, LN, looks like your mic is too far away. Your noise gate is cutting out every once in a while. Okay, let me move this a little closer to my face. I know it can be kind of hard to get all the mic settings just right, since especially new to live streaming, but hopefully this is a little better for you. Definitely got to make sure that noise gate is off, and I'll make sure it's off in the next stream. So cool. So we have the beginning of our actual modal, and we just have to keep styling this further and further to make sure that it matches what we have over here. So what else is different about this modal? Well, obviously it is smaller width-wise than we have in the actual screen right here. So we need to make sure that we have a max width associated with our actual modal over here. And the max width, sometimes you just have to play with to get the right one. And these are all just Tailwind classes by default, but basically it just ranges from MD to large, medium, large, to extra large, and you just have to kind of toy with things until you get something that looks similar to this. It doesn't have to be exact, but it should look close at least if you're going to be sending this design off to a client and then developing it as needed. This is looking kind of close. Maybe just one more at 3XL. And I would say that's probably the closest that we have right now. Excuse me. I might even go back to the 2XL, but we'll see. So we basically shrank the width of our modal. And we just got to keep going to make sure that this matches up with what we have over here. So you'll see we have padding on the left and the top hand side. we don't have any padding on our current element. So what we're going to do is we're going to select a tailwind padding class, which is prefixed by P. And then you can start using the spacing indicators that Tailwind provides to try to get something that actually looks like what we have over here. I'm just going to keep playing with this until I get something that looks good, that gives me enough padding to match up with what we actually designed. And I would say this is kind of close at the moment, maybe not exact, but it's going to be good enough to work with for now, and then we can kind of fine tune things as needed later on. Another thing is we want to make sure that this modal is completely centered like we have in the design as well. And to do that, we want to make sure that the container for everything, which is this black transparent background, has a flex class associated with it. And if a parent class, such as this black transparent background, has a flex element associated with it, we can do some pretty cool things, such as centering the items inside of it. And the item inside of it is just this modal. And so once we add item center, really this is just setting the flex property, saying I want to center this directly vertically in the middle of the screen. Then we can also say we want to justify this center to make sure that it's also centered on the left and sides. And these are all just Tailwind classes. I'm not creating these. I never created these. I just pulled them in directly from the library. It just makes development way easier because you don't have to go into a separate file to start editing classes. You don't have to think of class names, which is why I really like Tailwind. It just makes my development much more enjoyable than it would be otherwise. So we're getting a lot closer. We also have this greenish background for our text. So to edit the text color, we'll just add a class to our H2. Then we say, what color do we want this? And it's going to be green, and I think it's going to be 900. Typically, your shades of green, when using Tailwind, they range from 1 to 900. And I actually automatically put them in my XD document, which you might have noticed over here. And I just basically use these directly from Tailwind's default styles. So I know that this is 900 because it's the darkest, this is 100 because it's these actually might not be from Tailwind, they might be from Material UI, but you can pretty much associate these with any Tailwind shade that you'd like. Tailwind shades always range from 900 to 100, and they go by increments of 100, just change whatever shade it is, but still have some sort of differentiation between the shades. So by adding the text green 900, we see that we have the green text now, which is great, but still not done quite yet. We need to round the borders on this, as you can see over here. And to round the borders on an element, using Tailwind, I believe we just added class rounded. If this isn't it, then we can always look at the Tailwind docs. But if we zoom in here, you'll notice how the borders are rounded. It's not really noticeable. We'll round them a little more by saying rounded large instead. That's probably exactly what we want. We have that nice, friendly, welcoming look associated with our modal rather than the hard, harsh edges that we would have otherwise. We have the rounded edges, great, but our text isn't really in line with what we have in the design. There's just something off about this text. So let's inspect it and see what our default paragraph text is. So the font size is 1M, and 1M just means it's the default font set for the project. And I know the default font set by the project should be 14 pixels. And you'll see right here, if we look at our body, the font size is 14 pixels. I pretty much never recommend making your default font size 14 pixels because it just throws off so much stuff in the rest of your app. So technically this should be 16 pixels, but 1M specifies that it's the default body size, which just means that this font size is 14 pixels. It should be 16. But we need to make sure that we fix this for each paragraph tag. So we're going to add a class, specify, we don't want this to be 1M. We probably want it to be like 1.25 to make sure it's 16. I'm just going to say text large because text base is typically 1M. And as you see here, basically what's happening is the default font size for this actual app, it might even be smaller than that 14 font size. You saw that it was X'd out when, where is it? When we actually looked at it right here, it looks like it's even smaller than what we see on 14, because when I add this class of text large, It's 1.125 rems, which is basically the same, almost the same thing as an M. This just makes sure it references the rems are just basically multiplicative scales based off the default HTML body size font. But even if we multiply like the current font size by 1.125, this is still way smaller than we want it to be. It's at 11.25 instead of something like 16 or 18 size font. So unfortunately, the scaling on the site is just messed up based on how we got it. So we kind of have to accommodate for that by upping the font size by a lot more. And you can kind of see what the exact font size is by going to computed and then checking it out. And you'll see this is definitely more along the lines than what we wanted, because we know the font size in here, 16 size font, 15 is probably close enough. So we're just going to go with that. But we might even need to affect the line height on this too, because I think there might be a little too much line height associated with the text. I think it's just added on there by accident by the previous developers. So to add line height and affect line height, we're going to say tracking should be, I believe, normal is basically the base tracking for Tailwind. If I don't know something with Tailwind CSS, I just go to their documentation site and I look it up. So if we do line height, let's see what classes they have associated with it. Letting normal is 1.5, which is set to right now. Within our design, this is actually around like 1.4 line height. Over here, since 20 is, I believe, 1.4 times, I don't know. I may be completely wrong on that, but it just does look like a little off to me. So instead of doing tracking normal, I'm going to do tracking snug. And let's see if we can see a difference here. And I don't think we're seeing a difference because there might be some sort of important tag on this for the line height. Line height is 22.5. When I go to tracking normal, is it also 20? Yes, it is. So there's some sort of line height that's just overtaking this, and maybe it's even just me being an idiot. Yeah, it looks like I'm affecting the tracking rather than the letting, so this was definitely my fault. But let's go ahead and change the tracking to letting, see if we get a difference in the line height now. So tracking normal is what the actual line height was currently. If we change this to letting snug, okay, that's a little better. So the text is tighter, it's a little easier to read in my opinion, but obviously we need some sort of separation between the text beneath it. We're going to make sure we give this a margin bottom. We'll just say 8 for now, maybe even 6. Just want to make sure these two are separated. I think I'm going to stick with 8, and then I'm just going to copy the classes here, paste them on the paragraph text beneath it, like so. That's just going to make sure that the paragraph text beneath it has the exact same styling as the one above it. So are we done here? Let's just make sure that this text is a gray rather than some sort of black. So it is a gray, which is nice, and we might be able to leave it just like this because I do see some sort of differentiation between the headline and the actual text there, and that's the kind of effect that we want to achieve when making this paragraph text gray. Let's finish this off by adding the button. Going to be a close button. So you see we already added a button here with our button class, and we're going to say close inside of this. So we have a close button, but I'm not completely satisfied with how this looks. Obviously we want to make sure that this is off of the design, that it's gray, and that it just has like a little more width associated with it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this button in a div. Then I'm just going to make sure that it's aligned right by saying the text should be right. I believe, yeah, buttons are an inline block element. So since it's an inline block element, if you add text right to the parent, it's going to align everything right, just like we had in the design. So let's look at our Tailwind button class. Let's go to style. .scss, and I believe this class is at the button or the bottom because I did it in the last episode. So really what we want to do here is abstract this button, because right here, if we use Tailwind button, we have a background of green, which isn't really what we want when we want a gray background. So we're going to abstract this a little more. We're going to create a class for Tailwind button dash green, and we want to specify what should the green button look like compared to the gray button. So we're going to apply the tailwind class background brand green for the button green element. And the padding is a little off for this as well. So I'm going to transfer these padding classes to the button green element to make sure that the classes down here, these original buttons, which are now gone because they're missing their background as we took them out of the original button class, should maintain the padding that they had originally. So let's go ahead and make sure that those buttons appear. We'll see the buttons that were like under give by check are just gone completely now. Let's just search out our tailwind buttons and make sure that we add that tailwind button green class associated with it. And they should show back up once we add this on there. So let's look for the tailwind buttons. We're going to specify that they should be green. So now you see them in the background there. That's great. We want to make sure those stay the same. But obviously we want to create a gray button as well. We'll say tailwind btn gray. And this is going to have a background of, let's just start off with, I believe it was, let's just start off with a shade of 300. And we can always go lower or higher as needed. And the text for this should be a higher shade of gray. Let's just say it's going to start off at 600. Now, since we're adding text colors here as well, our default tailwind button class should not have a default text of white, because otherwise that would affect this one down here, saying that our gray button should have a text of white as well. Only our tailwind button green should have that text white. So checking in all the comments over here, what do we got? So we got Nabil Mohammed, super cool. Josh Barron, how do I make my feet cut longer? Thank you so much, Josh, for tuning in. I love you. You know, all I gotta say is, what are PowerPoints, man? That's really all I gotta say. For those of you watching, Josh Barron's my friend that I work with. He's a great designer. Check him out at Hasa Studios. I forget his main website. Yo, give yourself a tag in the chat, Josh, if you want. But yeah, he's a great designer, motion designer overall, and I definitely reference him a lot for some of the stuff I'm even doing right here. So back at it, let's get this gray button going. We have the tailwind button gray, the tailwind button green, and everything like that. And when we specify we have a background gray and a text gray of 600, well, nothing's applying to our actual close button just yet, because we haven't specified within our actual HTML that we're using that close button, or that we're using that close class, excuse me. So if we look at close, and within tailwind button, we had TW button gray to specify that this is our gray button. You'll see we now have that gray background, but we don't have that padding that we wanted within the old button because we moved that padding onto our green button instead. We're going to take that padding, add it to our gray button, and we'll see, gives it that nice spacing, but this isn't exactly on the design. I want to make sure that this button is a little wider. So instead of a px of 8, I would say let's give ourselves a px of 16. Reading your messages now, Josh. You're right. I've never seen you in my life or worked with you or anything. Tam Limpicky, welcome back, man. Definitely remember you from last time. Thanks for tuning in again. Just let me know if you have any questions along the way. Finishing this up should be done within the next 10 minutes or so. Then end the stream there, but we'll definitely get to the next items on the to-do list within the next stream. But let's finish things up here. So since we added px16, we have that spacing that we were looking for within our actual XD document, which is cool. We have this uppercase text here that's in the design, but really if we look at the actual website, you'll see the learn more button here isn't actually uppercase. I mean, it can go either way, but usually I want to keep my buttons as consistent as possible rather than making one uppercase and one lowercase. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this capital case, make sure that not everything's uppercase, and that makes sure that just everything looks a little closer to the overall consistency and feel of the site. So hovering over this, it increases in size because we have this scale transition within the main button element, but the text turns white, and that's just a little hard to see. And the text is turning white because on hover we're specifying change the text color. I say changing the text color here probably doesn't matter too much, but we can make it a darker shade of gray just to give some effect that the user hovered over it. So our current text is gray 600. Let's say that when you hover over this, let's make this text gray 800 instead. And now we have the text getting a little darker and the button getting a little bigger to help indicate that a user can close out of this. So this is looking great. I mean, this is pretty close to what we have over here. That's pretty much how I would go about developing this, but we're not done just yet. A few things we need to do. We need to make sure this works across all sizes. If we expand this, it looks pretty good, but if we get super small, you're going to notice that eventually this gets pretty close to the edges. And if I were to shrink this even more, basically the white box would be touching the edges of the screen, which is something we just don't want. So in order to combat that, we can select our modal, give it an MX, which stands for left and right margin. We're going to give it an MX of 8. And as you can see, now it has some margin on the left and right hand side. So just make sure that the user knows that this is a modal and that it's not touching the left and right hand sides of the screen. So pretty simple stuff for the most part. And really, I think to finish this off, all we need to do is make sure that when a user hits close, that this is actually exited out of. And then when a user hits give by check, that it's inserted into. That'll be the last part. And this is pretty interesting if you're a Vue developer, because I'm going to show you the cool ways to get this going. And I'll even share some code snippets with you so you can use this in your own projects on how to add animations that are reusable and scalable within a Vue project. So we know that this is showing currently, even if I were to refresh the page. That's not what we want on the page though. So to combat this, we're going to use the view directive, and this only works if you're using Vue, so just a heads up. If you try this on just like a normal PHP project, it's just not going to work. But this view if directed, the vif directive from Vue basically specifies when do I want this element to actually be rendered on the screen. If this is set to false, then whatever condition inside of this is set to false, the element's not going to render. But if it's set to true, then it'll show. So the whole idea here is to reference JavaScript properties that can be set to equal to true or false. And then based on whether or not those are true or false, we're going to render this modal as desired. So we want to say if a property is equal to false, then don't show this. If it's changed equal to true, then show this. Right now, we don't have any properties within our Vue instance. It looks like we do have one, actually. This is related to a donate modal, but we're not really using this anymore. This is an old property. We're just going to create a new one for the give by check modal, which we just created. We're going to say give by check modal. If this is equal to true, then we're going to show this. If it's equal to false, then we're not going to show. So by default, it should be equal to false. That's what we're setting it to right now. Just want to make sure that this is auto formatted, and it is. So we created our data property equal to false. Now we have to specify with vif, if this property is equal to false, don't show it. If it's true, then show it. So now that we know it's set to false by default within index.js, and we added it to this vif directive, it's not going to show. If we set this equal to true though, you're going to see it come back up. And let's do a hard refresh. Make sure things are working. And it looks like we have a bug. So let's just go ahead and inspect and see what things are happening. If you ever come across a bug, just always open up the modal. And that's always going to be your first step to getting this going. All right, so since we deleted that donate modal property, it actually is being used right here. So we probably want to bring that back. I just thought it wasn't being used anymore because we ended up putting that modal in its own page. So what I'm going to do here to get that back is I'm just going to copy this property, Control-Z everything, and then beneath donate modal, I'm going to paste that property that we just copied. So that's going to fix the bugs. And now that you see that this is equal to true, it's actually showing on the page. If I set it equal to false, it's going to go away. So now we have this really cool thing in which we can just set this equal to true or false, and things are going to show just based on this vif directive. It's just a really clean way to do things, because doing this with JavaScript would be just a little messy compared to doing it the way we are now. So I'm going to check in on the questions real fast. All right, who we got? Isaac Gramquist at ignore. Yeah, it's probably to Josh. Like I said, he's a good friend of mine, but he's a troll as well. Tim Lempicky, you can always use text transform to control the capitalization across site buttons. Are you using JavaScript framework to do logic and the elements like that? Oh, Vue never. Yeah, so it is Vue. I am aware of like some text transform stuff with the capitalization as well. But I typically, sometimes I just write it out directly if I don't really need to ensure that the text is always capitalized. Like I can just ensure it's capitalized by writing it out instead of typing that capitalization class, which is why I just do it like that. But you're right, you can definitely use like some sort of Tailwind capitalization class to make sure that's capitalized, or that is uppercase, whatever it is that you need. Isaac Granquist, we get it, dude. View as easy mode, just build a thing. Appreciate comments like this, man. That just get me going. I'm just trying to make sure that anyone who's accessing this app is able, or accessing this video, is basically understanding what it is I'm doing and why they should be using specific frameworks. So I'm definitely going to be taking this easy, exactly like how I've been doing now. But definitely get to it and finish things up. So we know we're hiding the modal. We know we're showing the modal. Great. But now we need to make sure that event listener that we created earlier with view on click, open, give by check modal, we need to make sure that when you call this, we are changing this right here to true. So when we call this property, or when we call this method by clicking this button, we're going to set give by check modal equal to true. And that's just going to open things up. Oh, where did Chrome go? When we click on this, we have a bug. And let's just refresh the page and make sure that everything loaded. All right, so we have a reference error. Give by check modal is not defined, even though we have it right here. So this is going to be a little bit more debugging. And the main issue is when using view, if you want to reference this property right here, you have to prefix it with this, like so. You'll see I'm using it within this toggle donate modal, and I'm also using it right here within this open give by check modal. And by referencing this, we're just referencing exactly what we have within this data object. And so if I refresh that now and hit click learn more, we just set give by check modal open to true. And since we have if this is equal to true, then we're just going to show the modal. So that's great. But if we click close, now we need a way to exit out of the modal. And we also want to make sure that we exit out of the modal when clicking this transparent background. So how do we actually exit out of the modal? So instead of calling this open, I'm going to call this toggle modal because we also want a way to close out of this when something is clicked again. Rather than setting this equal to true, we're going to grab the current value of give by check modal, which is false for now, and we're going to set things to the opposite of that. So if we click it once, it's going to be set to true. And then if we click something again that also calls toggle give by check modal, we're going to set it equal to false. This just gives us a way to always toggle between true and false, compared to if we were just to try to make one toggle give by check modal, or excuse me, one open modal method and then one close modal method. All right, so let's just make sure things still function as we desire, and they don't, because since we called this toggle give by check modal, we need to make sure that we we change the original event listener that we created on this learn more button. So this used to be open give by check modal. We're changing it to toggle. We save things, refresh, and now things work as expected, but we still need to add that event listener onto the close button. We're going to select click, find our close button as well, and we're just going to paste that click method, that click event listener onto this button, and call the exact same thing, because since we said that this should be equal to the opposite, it's going to make sure that when it's equal to true and we click it again, that it's equal to false. So now we have a way to toggle beneath the two instances. All right, so let's go ahead and check in on chat. Are you using Vuex in this project? No, I'm not. There's just no reason for me to use Vuex right now. Typically, Vuex is like for some hardcore applications and where you need to share state between different components. But really, for this, since this is just like a simple marketing site, there's no reason to really use that global state. You can just manage state directly within the index.js object right here, this data property instead. Just makes things a lot cleaner and a lot less worry and mental shift within your head that you need to use. So now that we have this, everything technically works. We could send this to a client and you'd probably be happy with it because it works as expected, but there are a few things that we can do better. And one of those things that we can do is we can make sure that we have an animation added onto this to make sure that this is scaling into the screen and things are a lot smoother. So the cool way to do this with Vue is I have this custom component that I created. I use this across a lot of my projects, including my chriscourses.com. I use this across client websites, client apps, and everything like that. And this transition element is, I'm just going to show you exactly what I mean by this. This is the element that we're going to be using. And basically, if we import this into our view file and wrap anything that has a VF directive in it, it's going to automate with exactly the exact animation we specify over here. So to make use of this, I want to make sure that I have this transition, which thankfully I do, already in place. And then I just need to import it within our actual view instance. So I'm importing a few components already, but I need to make sure that I'm importing the scale in component. So I'm importing scale in, not from pages, but I'm importing it from transitions. And that transition is scale in. And then since I'm importing it, I need to make sure that view can actually read it. And so I'm going to specify that it should be a component. And so right over here, we're saying we cannot find the module scale in component. I'm probably just referencing something wrong. And I am, so I need to make sure that I go inside of the components directory before I actually get into the transitions directory. And once I do that, it looks like we're good to go. And we can start using the scale in component as we want to. So like I said, if I just wrap this in a scale in tag, which references that scale in component that I created right here, refresh the page, and then I hit learn more. Well, now we have the actual transition in effect. And it has two different things happening. It's scaling in, and then when I hit close, it fades out. And that's just specified over here. This is the scale in transition, and this is what happens on the leave transition. This is what happens when you leave. But there's an issue. We don't want that background. We don't want this gray background actually scaling in. We just want the actual modal scaling in. So there are a few things that we can do here to make sure that this happens. I think really the best thing to do is to grab this VF directive. And we are going to paste this onto our actual modal. That way we can say, if this modal is wrapped in scale in, just going to do a few indentation things here to make sure that we're using some clean coding methods. And I actually want to hide this black transparent background by default as well. I'm just going to take background black transparent off. And I think, so we only want scale in right here, but we still want this VIF directive on this black transparent background. Because remember, we only want this background showing if this is set to true, but we only want the transition actually happening on the modal. We hit learn more. Things aren't working just yet, but we can definitely debug this to find out what's going on. Gonna check in on chat real quick. That was a dope animation. Thank you, man. Like I said, I'll be posting this on like a gist for you all. You can make use of this animation as well. Just a little something I created using GSAP. Really simple, as you can see here. Just makes things bigger, and then we exit out, makes things smaller. So I want to make sure that we're finishing things up for you guys, not holding you on too long. And if I ever have trouble like remembering how exactly I did something, such as like the code I did for this modal, like how did I make sure that only that white part scales in and the background fades out, I pretty much always just go to another project in which I did it in, including something like chriscourses.com, and I can see exactly how I did this. And you'll see over here, I actually have this background black transparent separate from the white modal. So that is something that we can make sure we do here. We want to make sure that we separate the black background from the modal. Let's go ahead and get that started. So we have the scale in effect only if this is equal to true. Everything's looking good up here. But background black transparent should be separate. So what I'm going to do here is we can literally just copy and paste this, which just acts as that black background. Paste it in here. We want to make sure that this only shows if this is equal to true. Use VIF for this as well. We don't need this data text element. We're not using tests. When we click this, what happens? Well, we want to exit out of the modal. We want to toggle the modal. instead of just this close modal method, we're going to reference our toggle modal method. This is absolute, which just means it takes up the entire screen. But we need to make sure that we import this fade in out element within our actual Vue.js instance. So instead of scale in, we're going to use fade in out, which is going to reference a element, a transition component over here. We don't really have that transition component as you see within our transitions folder. We're just going to go inside that transition folder, get fade in and out, create it within our project, fade in out dot view, paste it in there, should work exactly the same by default. Save things over here, and since we're importing it into our main Vue instance, we need to make sure we say that it's a component that we can use within our Vue files. And once we do that, we should be able to use, we should be able to see some sort of fade in out transition happening. So we're getting an error, and this just looks like something within our code that we have to fix up. And the issue, I believe, is we have a self-closing div tag. And by default, I don't believe PHP files, even if they're rendered by Vue, recognizes the self-closing tag. So I'm going to make sure we have a closing tag in there. See, that goes away, fixes our error, and that was definitely it. Now we still have a few issues here. And we can't click on anything, and that's because this element that's showing by default right here is essentially clickable. And since it's clickable, it's basically overlaid on top of everything else, making everything not clickable. So if we go between our reference code over here, which has that modal, you'll see it has this view class, which is conditional. So if I add this on top of here, basically this is saying, I don't want this to be able to be clicked on if our modal is closed. Only add pointer events none, which is a class that says, hey, you can't click on this if this is equal to false. So, or if this is equal to the opposite of whether or not this is open. I hope that makes sense. So if I refresh this, you'll see now we can click on things because we have pointer events none set on our main element, because this is reading as true, even though it's set to false. This little exclamation point sign just says read the opposite. But once I click on this, it's basically saying to activate our animation as needed, and that you can click on it because we want to make sure that we close out of things based on whether or not you click on this background, or based on whether or not you click on this close button. So you see now we have the animation in place thanks to pointer events none, thanks to this fade in out transition, and thanks to the scale in transition. And things are looking a lot better than they did. And now I would say this is probably ready to send to the client for this. They can give us the text that they want in this box. We'll add it in. But this is looking good on both mobile and desktop. We now have a full component, a full section, a new feature for the client to actually add into here. So that's going to be it for this stream, I believe. I'm going to make sure that you guys watching can essentially get all of the transition components that I've created, including fade in, out, and scale in. So what I'm going to do is really quickly, I'm going to try to make a gist on GitHub, and I'll post the links in the chat. So GitHub gist, I'll just make a new gist. Trying to find out here. Okay, this looks good. So this will be scale in dot view transition. Copy and paste the code in there. Will be a public gist. So now I have a URL, and if you guys want to make use of these transitions yourself in your own Vue apps, this is going to be the code you want to use. Basically surround any elements that use that VF directive in order to activate the animation. And then I'll create one as well for not just that, but I'll create one for that fade in out component too. .view. This is a public gist. When you're using these, just make sure that you install GSAP into package.json, otherwise these won't work. This is just the library that I use to animate these. Really clean for the most part, definitely recommend it. This is going to be second gist for that animation. And yeah, just kind of try to see how I do things within the video in order to get this working. It can be a little confusing at first if you're new to Vue, programming in general. But this should be good to get you started and just give you an idea from how I would actually design something to actually developing it and then sending it off to a client. I guess really to finish things off, what I would do here is I would just commit this as a git commit and say state exactly what I did, which is add this give by check modal. Add give by check modal. It's going to create the commit. Then I'll push it up the version control, which I host on Pantheon. Pantheon is just a very good host for WordPress related sites. And this just contains all the clients that I work for regarding to WordPress. And this is just going to push things directly up to a dev site for Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay. So if I click on the actual site, you'll see that it's syncing code to dev. This just means the code that I just pushed up is being loaded onto their dev site. Now that it's up there and I visit the development site on the actual live URL, I can go to the page that we just developed. And I believe it is just /donate on the site. Hit learn more, and now you see our code is actually pushed to a dev site automatically just by pushing it through Git. Some really cool stuff, and this would be the link that we send to the client to test things out to make sure that it's working. Going back to the chat, Lenny, oh no, I'm late. No worries, man. Just feel free to watch the stream. It'll be posted immediately after the stream's done. You're not gonna be missing anything, but feel free to ask me some questions. Got about like 2-3 minutes before I head out. Manuel Penaloza, great stream. Greetings from Austria. Tired as hell, just getting up for this. Thank you, man. I know you've been around from the start. Always see you comment on my stuff. Definitely appreciate all of your support through everything. Don't worry, I recognize you, but I definitely appreciate it. So thank you for tuning in, even if it's kind of early up over there in Austria. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for the stream. Unless you guys have any more questions, we'll give about 1 more minute to answer any more questions in the chat. So post them up if you've got them. And while we're waiting on those questions, kind of just go ahead and do my plug time. So I just made a premium service for chriscourses.com in which I'm hosting premium videos, kind of like a subscription service, similar to LinkedIn Learning, Treehouse, everything like that. This is just like a way in which I see myself like being able to pay the bills in a way it's a little more enjoyable than my typical day-to-day job stuff. So I have some courses in the making, some premium stuff such as like how to develop web apps, everything along the lines of that. I really only have 1 premium video, so it's probably honestly not worth subscribing at the moment, but just keep an eye out in the future for more premium videos. Basically, these videos are live streams, but cut down to like 10 minutes so you guys get all the content right off the bat without having to hear me ramble about anything. So definitely be sure to check out any of these premium videos. You're going to be learning a lot and really appreciate your support along the way. Let's see. We got some questions along the way. Tim Lempicky, thanks. No problem. Really appreciate you looking in. Khadijah, you guys are such fucking trolls. How much do I lift? It depends on which one you want to know. I can lift a 5-pound dumbbell for sure. That's pretty good stuff. Do you make your logos yourself? So Isaac Granquist, the logos, I believe you're referring to maybe like the Chris Courses logo or even the RTTB logo over here. These are not things that I've made, although I have made my own logos in the past. This was made by a designer. I'm not really sure which designer made this. This is something I basically took on from them. But this Chris Courses logo over here was made by that guy, Joshua Barron, in the chat. He's a great designer, like I said. Put together typography. I think I actually like edited this a little bit to include his spaceship with like the trails over here, but spaceship design and the text and everything like that was made by him. So typically I do use like a nice designer to get these things going. Keep answering questions. Tim Lipicki, I see my camera's dying. I know I have that thing connected to a battery instead of main power source, but thankfully we're ending the stream soon. Well, maybe not thankfully for anyone who wants questions answered, but should be good enough to keep going for now. Josh, how about some Overwatch now? I would love to, man. I haven't played Overwatch in like 2 years now. But if I could get to the state where I could just play Overwatch all day, I think I'd be pretty happy for at least a week. So yeah. Josh, I know you made the stuff. I forgot that like I did the whole logo part directly, but yeah, it's a combination of your spaceship text, whatever. It's all really helpful stuff for me putting this together. But yeah, like I said, check out that guy, Josh Barron, if you're looking for some good logo stuff. That link, hotsauce.studio, as you can see in the chat, and give him some love for sure. But otherwise, I'm going to be done for this stream right now. And some of the future streams, we'll be sure to finish off some of the stuff in here, such as adding the donate in honor of someone functionality, and then just adding the new footer. The new footer should be a breeze, really easy stuff, but this might be another hour-long video or so. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next stream. Peace.